Hello, everyone. I am Jeff Axt, Managing Editor at BioSpace, and welcome to this BioSpace event, Shifting Risk, Biopharma in an Age of Deregulation. It's going to be a great discussion. I'm here with former FDA Chief Information Officer Vid Desai, and we're going to talk about the future of drug regulation in the US, so thanks for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment, but before we get started, I have a few notes I need to cover briefly. Attendees, you are in listen-only mode. Questions are welcome. We'll try to save about 20 minutes at the end to discuss, so you can submit them at any time, and we'll do our best to get to them. Questions are anonymous to other attendees. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link following the event, should you want to share it or review it afterward. If you're not very familiar with BioSpace, we're a leading news and careers site in biopharma. We have over 1 million monthly visitors and hundreds of thousands of subscribers. We have 2 podcast shows, The Weekly, featuring yours truly. I am joined by my editors, and we discuss the biggest stories of the week. And then we also have Denatured, which does deep dives into big picture issues and topics impacting our industry. We also have a bunch of free newsletters that you can sign up for on biospace.com. Just hit subscribe on the top right. And we also release regular reports on labor market trends, compensation benchmarking, branding, and more. So definitely check it out. And now on with the show. So like I said, I'm honored to be joined today by Vid Desai. He has spent most of his career in IT and healthcare and the life sciences industries, including 13 years at GSK, back when GSK became GSK in 2000, following the merger of GlaxoSmithKline Wellcome and SmithKline Beecham. He's also worked at major contract clinical research organizations and medical device companies. So he's got a number of different varied perspectives within the engine of drug and device development. He ultimately ended up at the FDA in 2019 and moved up to his role as Chief Information Officer in 2021. And he actually successfully advocated for that role to report directly, there we go, there he is, for the CEI role to report directly to Commissioner. And so gave him a seat at the table, at the executive committee table, which was a neat shift there. So he had several years there serving under multiple commissioners. He did retire in August. So moving on to new things, I spoke with Vid about a month ago or so, right after he retired from FDA, and he described a future of drug regulation and how it might evolve as a result of Trump's general push toward deregulation. So that's going to be the topic of focus today. To give you a little bit of background on how this event came together, we have, there's a lot of changes ongoing at FDA. I've already thrown up this chart that I'll talk about here in just a minute. And we really at BioSpace wanted to take a look back and understand how the evolving regulatory landscape is affecting biopharma. So one focus that will be today is Trump's general push towards deregulation. As I said, if you recall, one of his first executive orders back in January stated that for every new regulation, 10 must be repealed. On the surface, that might seem like welcome news for drug makers. Could this provide maybe an easier path to market? But Vid, as he will state for himself, he issued a strong warning that, be careful what you wish for. There's a way that this will evolve, and whether or not it's good for drug makers is maybe to be determined. So that's the focus of conversation today. It'll be more of a mid to long-term outlook on the FDA through that lens. And then it's actually part of a 2-part series. In a couple of weeks, I'll be sitting down with another panel of regulatory experts to understand how the industry is really adapting in real time to some of the regulatory changes that are coming from the administration. So tune into that. It'll be another live broadcast on November 5th. But now getting on with today's event. So I threw up the slide to show you. I really wanted to set the stage, a little bit of background for this conversation. It's been an incredibly tumultuous year in biopharma, to say the least, and much of that is due to the ongoing upheaval in the Department of Health and Human Services under Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So earlier this year, thousands were laid off. We saw some surprise departures of senior leadership. Always the first name that comes to my mind when we're thinking about this is Peter Marks, former CBER director. He was forced into retirement in late March over some vaccine safety data. And the XBI stock index for biotech just plummeted dramatically after Marx's exit. It was really a hit for the industry. So at that time, it was actually Marx's ouster that prompted myself and a couple of my colleagues to undertake an analysis of the turnover that we were seeing at the level of senior leadership at the FDA. And so that's what we put together, this org chart, which just looked back to what the leadership looked like 6 months prior at the time of the election, and then just marking those individuals who had left the agency. Now, not all of these are due to layoffs, but it was just, I think, a very visual demonstration of the breadth of institutional knowledge that has been lost over that time. So you can see Vid Desai's there, Vid Desai's name there up at the top. He did receive a RIF notice in early April. And then, like I said, he ultimately took his retirement in August. So with that, that's a lot of background, but I would like to welcome Vid, and we will get into what we're going to talk about today. Hi, Vid. Can you see and hear me all right?
I can. Good afternoon.
Hello, hello.
That was quite an introduction. So thanks for that.
There's a lot to cover, a lot about you, a lot about the FDA itself. And actually, that's where I'd really like to start. So I just kind of gave a very, very brief overview of all of the changes that are ongoing at FDA. That impacted you directly. You ended up taking your retirement. That is a huge life event for anybody in any situation. And then only a couple of weeks ago, you decided to not entirely retire, but you have now started your own consulting agency. So give us just a little peek into your perspective of the industry right now, of regulation specifically, and of your role in it and what you're doing now.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, we're going through a lot of change right now, and frankly, to be honest, you know, as I reflect back and look at what's going on, much of the intent of this administration makes good sense. In fact, I welcome it. You know, nobody looks at the government and feels like, you know, it's good enough. You know, we shouldn't change government. Everybody wants change. So the fact that change is happening is good. I think many of us wish that the change was executed in a more thoughtful manner. The execution could be a little bit better. So I think that's where I'm at. But I am tremendously bullish right now. And to be honest, you know, one of the things I contemplated as I was thinking about retirement was what saddened me the most about my retirement and the phase of life that I'm in is I do that at a time that I think is very, very exciting. You know, on the science side, we've got some remarkable, you know, finally we're seeing the shift from chemistry to genomics finally start to happen. The whole promise of designer drugs or very, very specialized treatments is starting to happen now. On the technology side, you know, we've got this huge innovations with AI and all that stuff going on. Anyone on the regulatory and government side, you know, change finally seems to be happening now. You know, we can argue and quibble about, you know, some things are great, some things are not, but at least the culture of change is happening, and those are all good things. So I think when you put all that stuff together, I think we're in a very tremendously exciting time. I just hope that we settle down a little bit and do things a little bit more thoughtfully rather than you know, I think we've all seen the chainsaw things. That's not the way to, you know, nothing with precision or good happens with a chainsaw, unless you're a lumberjack. But in science and medicine, certainly, we don't do a lot of things with chainsaws. And I think in healthcare, change is good, but I think it needs to be done a little bit more thoughtfully. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's sort of where I am personally with what's going on.
Okay, fantastic. So diving right into the heart of the discussion then is this idea that we're pushing towards deregulation. Obviously, Trump has stated as much. So in our earlier call, you really described to me this vision of the future of drug regulation and review, where maybe there is an easier path to get to market. Maybe we have streamlined some of those regulations on the front end, but then maybe there's higher post-market sort of safety surveillance, and maybe drug makers might be getting more and more inquiries from the FDA based on this heightened surveillance. So, you know, good and bad, depending on, you know, which stakeholder you're looking at. Elaborate on that vision for us, and where do you see the FDA in 3, 5, 10 years?
Sure, great question. So, I mean, it's clear that this administration in particular is pushing very hard towards deregulation. I think deregulation has sort of been a bit of a theme anyway, but I think certainly it's in a whole new gear right now with this administration. And I think many in the industry see that as, you know, deregulation equates to faster approvals and less interference by the regulatory authorities and that kind of stuff. But lowering the regulatory bar increases risk. and the chance of something slipping through um, uh, is increases. And a more rigorous process would need to be put in to catch those types of issues. So I think on the industry side, certainly I think there's a lot of people thinking that this is going to make life easier. Um, but I think what they haven't thought through is the fact that as we deregulate, the regulatory agencies will shift their focus and attention to building better safety surveillance systems. And as that happens, things will change. And I think some of them that will have good outcomes. Certainly, patients will benefit from it. But the industry may just be shifting burden. So better safety surveillance. If we're going to approve faster, we need faster systems to catch problems earlier. And today, let me describe a little bit about how safety surveillance works in the FDA today. And then I'll describe what I think how that system is going to evolve over the next 3, 5, 10 years. So today, for safety surveillance, the FDA relies on things like headlines and news events. Uh, I think in a couple of years ago in Western North Carolina, we had a Baxter plant due to some heavy rainfalls that got flooded. Now this plant produced IV fluids used very broadly. I think 80–90% of the fluids in America were delivered from this warehouse and manufacturing facility. And obviously, when that gets flooded, that's going to cause some supply chain issues. But those headlines matter. You know, there's some scrutiny that may need to be provided as those types of events happen. So the FDA has a system by which we look around and capture headlines and news events and think about what are the regulatory implications of that. We look at whistleblower complaints. We get a lot of complaints through whistleblowers that may see something bad happening in their manufacturing facilities and stuff like that. So there's a system to capture those. We look at the inspection history of a particular plant. We typically try to inspect most manufacturing plants within 3 to 5 years, at least once. So, you know, when's the last time we did something? And then the final thing is, you know, we capture a lot of adverse events. Adverse events with healthcare products are reported both directly to the FDA, but many also get reported through to CDC. But we capture those events and we look at those, and all of these are put into a system where we evaluate risk. And then based on that, we'll determine what kind of regulatory action, if any, is needed. So that's roughly how things work. And I want to focus on that last point on the adverse events reports. When you look at adverse events, only 1 to 5% of actual adverse events are reported. Most physicians are far too busy with just the normal paperwork, billing paperwork, and notes and things like that to be able to be bothered to report adverse events. And if they do report them, it's typically when something horribly wrong has gone on. Most of the minor ones never ever get reported. And there's really no incentive to encourage physicians to report these things. And even if they do report it, if you're a good physician, you report it, there's a good chance that the regulatory agency is going to call back and ask for more information or more forms to fill out, which again, you know, for a busy physician is not really a great incentive. Now imagine a future system, safety surveillance systems, where we have built-in agents directly into the electronic health record system, the EHR systems, your Epics, your Cerners, and there were agents that were built into these systems that are looking for potential adverse events that are happening and reporting them automatically to the regulatory agency. Now, this might sound far-fetched, but let me tell you that systems like this already exist today, and most of you have probably already interacted or used these types of systems. So, for example, when you go shopping and you use your credit card, if you were spending something that's slightly different to your spending patterns, the credit card systems, the fraud systems pick that up, and you get a text message or something to say, you know, did you really mean to buy this? And that happens in near real time. The system that I am describing right now, with the EHR agents built into it, would function that way. So at the point of care where physicians put some notes in there, the system is capable of recognizing that something unusual has happened here that is worth reporting, and that gets reported directly. Now, when you think about that system, we are now flipping from an environment where less than 10% of adverse events are reported to over 95% of adverse events are reported and acted on. That's the change I want people to think about. It's it significantly changes how sponsor companies are going to be operating. So you may not get as many inspections. Your regulatory your products may be much faster in getting approved, but you may get a lot more inquiries. Many of them generated automatically through AI agents and technology agents, where it's going to basically send you a letter and say, we noticed this pattern. We're a little bit concerned. Help us understand this. And those kinds of interactions will increase. And in my thinking, they'll increase substantially. So in reality, I think the regulatory burden will shift. But that's something that I think industry should be paying attention to and be thinking about, because that is where a leaner or less regulatory system will eventually evolve into. So, I think of this as a little bit like, we are following that principle of fail quick, fail fast, fail with the least harm. That's the future of regulatory safety surveillance. But here's a twist, that I wanted to make sure that everybody understands. The burden doesn't disappear. It just shifts. You'll get more automated inquiries. You'll get more false positives, and there'll potentially be more follow-ups that you'll be required to follow up on. And before I left the FDA, we were already thinking about such an environment. We were already looking at funding, which is one of the key issues obstacles that we had in building such a system. And we were looking at our spend on systems like HR, finance, procurement. And frankly, we were spending more on those areas than we were on submission reviews or safety surveillance systems. And that's something we recognized needed to shift. And those shifts were starting to happen. And and I think in the current environment, certainly a lot of programs have been stopped, a lot of waste has been stopped. So there's a lot of dollars left over, and I think the funding issue is probably not as significant an issue anymore. But I think this kind of a change requires a strategic approach to execution. That's not going to happen the current way the administration is operating. Right now, we've got a series of tactical and pet projects being pushed. There's a lot of chaos. Strategy never happens in chaos. So it's in the next couple of years, I think the FDA is probably going to hunker down into a survival mode type of an environment. Let's just get through the chaos right now. But I'm hopeful that a future administration will come in with some more thoughtful planning and execution to build on what this administration has started. Because one of the legacies that I think this administration will leave behind, potentially leave behind, is they have actually broken the can't do culture that used to exist in government. When we were trying to drive change within the FDA, there was a lot of, you can't do that, or we won't do that. There's a lot of resistance to change. I think this administration has pretty much broken that. And that's a good thing. And if that's the legacy that this administration leaves behind, that's actually a good thing to build on, because there was a lot of that can't do, won't do culture. And if we can emerge out of this chaos and hopefully get into a can do and will do or must do culture, I think that's a good thing and a good legacy to build on. So I'm hopeful that a future administration will come in. They'll bring in some good change drivers that'll leverage the new, leaner culture that this administration has started and drive the change that I think needs to, and many of us had been planning to do for many, many years, but were slowed down because of the resistance that that I had built up in government. So I'll pause there. But I think that's a little bit of the shift that's likely to happen as we deregulate, and some of the systems that are going to need to change, but also some of the cultural things that have changed that I think in the long run could be good.
Yeah, point out because there was a little bit of rigidity to how it was operating before. Now have a little bit more openness. So specifically about what the FDA is doing now in terms of changes, some of them seem somewhat incongruent towards this push to deregulate. And so it's interesting to hear that you think we're kind of just going to hunker down in this chaos for a few years and then maybe emerge with this vision, because I wanted to ask you specifically about some of, increasing the bar maybe for drug approvals in oncology. There's been new guidance and they're pushing to maybe make a little bit higher bar in certain areas while reducing the bar maybe in rare disease, and to push forward in certain areas. So I don't know if we're immediately seeing this easier path to market. And then on the flip side, on the safety surveillance side, we're seeing more of a push towards making clear the safety adverse events that have been recorded, but maybe not collecting them in the through the EHRs and stuff that you're talking about. So what is sort of the timeline that you see for some of these changes actually happening?
Yeah, I think currently things are all over the place, and they're all over the place because much of what is happening right now is driven more by ideology than anything else. And that's what the reference I made, they're driving pet projects or pet types of initiatives. I think that's what's happening right now. There's really no strategy there. So that's why it just appears to be all over the place, and many things that they're doing may even seem contradictory. So I think that's the result of a ideology-based approach that's currently going on. I think the environment right now is also very chaotic. There's we're all reading the headlines in terms of the staff reductions, the firings, and all that stuff. So there's a lot of change going on, and I think as I speak to my former colleagues, it just feels very chaotic right now. I don't think anything strategic is going to happen right now. But like I said, the one theme that is emerging from much of what I see happening in the agency is many of the cultural things that people used internally to resist change have gone away, are broken. We had some ridiculous rules about restructuring and reorganizations, and I'll give you an example. I was trying to restructure a 600-person IT team that had over 300 supervisors. And clearly on the books, and so obviously, you don't need 300 supervisors to manage 600 people. That would be some extreme variant of well managed. But in the new structure, we basically, not everybody wanted to be a supervisor. So we were trying to flatten the organization, and nobody was going to lose their jobs. Nobody was going to lose their seniority or level or anything like that. But we didn't need them to be supervisors. Well, the HR department determined that would cause harm, and we were not allowed to drive that. I'd love for those HR folks, many of whom are still there, to try and explain how what the current administration is doing is not harmful. So I think so those were just some extreme interpretations of some ridiculous rules that people had imagined. I think what this administration has done is destroy a lot of those myths, and I think that's actually a good thing. And people use these types of rules or interpretations of rules to resist change, whether it's a restructuring or even something silly like, documents needing signatures. Not everything needs a signature, but because somebody had written that in policy about 2 decades ago, they were just going to stick to it, even though it made no sense. So those types of I'm hopeful that coming out of this administration, the one beneficial thing that'll stay with government is that those ridiculous rules were just ridiculous and didn't need to be enforced. Um, but that cultural change, I'm hoping, will be something that future administrations will continue to build on. Um, they need to do it in a more thoughtful way. The execution needs to be a little bit more planned and not random. And hopefully it's the many of these decisions will be made by people who are part of the administration or organization rather than bringing in some new folks, junior folks from the outside that have no idea how these agencies operate. But the fact that we're driving change, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, I think you might have just started to answer my next question, which is maybe it's this cultural shift that you're describing that may open the door for Trump's deregulation push to actually happen. Because if you think back to his first term, when you started the FDA, actually, he had a very similar executive order, again, within weeks of taking office. And back then it was a 2-for-1. For every regulation, you need to take 2 away. And by all accounts, and some of the numbers I was looking at, kind of the opposite happened. We didn't lose regulations during that period of time. We actually got more regulations. Now he's saying 10-to-1, but how do we know that's actually going to happen? And looking, historically, maybe it wouldn't, but maybe, like I said, this cultural shift that you're observing could be the difference.
Yeah, and I think look, some of government is a very change-resistant organization, and one of the frustrations I had with the FDA is people, the leadership typically did not want to ruffle feathers, and change almost always is going to piss somebody off, right? So you cannot be wanting to drive change, but be afraid to ruffle feathers. And I think that's the issue we had going on a lot at the FDA, and that slowed us down a lot. I think the current administration, frankly, is not afraid of ruffling feathers, and I actually welcome that part. Some ruffling of feathers is okay, and I hope some of that sticks around because there are layers and layers of antibodies within government that resist change and frankly make it so difficult to change even the smallest things. So I think there's a lot of that going on, but I'm hoping that what this administration has done, and even the 10-for-1 rule, right? So I don't fully agree with that. I personally think there should be some incentives offered that basically say, look, if you're going to put in a new regulation, but then at the same time you've got 4 or 5 other regulations you're taking off, we will prioritize that higher, or it'll get through faster. I think some of those would be a little bit of better ways of doing that. I also think when you look at regulations in particular, regulations typically happen when something bad happens. So it's usually a reactionary thing to something bad that has already happened. And that's so we'll slap on some regulations saying, well, you can't do this, that, or the other. We seldom create regulation to incentivize good behavior or something good to happen. We don't do that. And I think that's another place that regulatory authorities or agencies should be looking to do. You can incentivize good behavior or something, good actions to occur. And I think there should be more regulations thought about for doing those types of things. I think we also need to clean house. There should be a requirement that every 3 to 5 years, we look at regulations and say, does this still apply? If it doesn't apply, then let's get rid of it, because those things do slow us down as well. But I think this brute force way of doing it, you got to get rid of 10 to introduce one. I'm not sure that's the best way of doing that. But the intent behind that, which is let's look at some of the older regulations, and if they don't apply right now, let's get rid of them. Many of FDA's regulations were created decades ago when we were completely paper-based. Now we're a lot more into electronic submissions and paper data submissions. And that requires a different approach. So I think it is good to go back and look at many of those regulations and see if they are still applicable or not. But the brute force way of doing that is probably the only way this administration could overcome some of the resistance. But I think hopefully they're being a little bit more thoughtful about that. Hopefully, if somebody has three regulations they can take off to pass one good regulation, hopefully that's been given some consideration. It shouldn't become a non-runner just because they can't come up with 10.
Sure. Okay. So the cultural shift to be more open to change, that's a good thing. Cleaning house, looking at some old regulations that may need updating or eliminating, that's also a good thing. Playing it forward all the way through to your vision of easier path to market, but higher real-time safety surveillance. Is that a good thing? Who would benefit most from that sort of scenario?
I think patients will, to be honest. I think patients definitely benefit from this. If all of us know somebody somewhere that is suffering from some horrible disease that doesn't have great treatments, and if people would do anything to have early access to many of those treatments and medications. If we were to create an environment where they can get to those treatments quicker and faster, I think that's a good thing. Now, there's obviously some risk being taken, if we can have a system that is watching over all the adverse events or things happening in the healthcare system, picking up on signals where something may be going off the rails, and stopping that or raising that for further research quickly, that's a good thing. So I think those types of things do benefit patients. I think they'll benefit industry as well. I think it's good for industry. I don't think anybody in the industry is gonna complain if we have an environment where revenue is realized a little bit quicker than what they're able to right now. If some of that research investment can be monetized. So I think it is a good system, but and a good thing. But I think the appetite and what it's going to take to build that is an area we should discuss, because there are many barriers stopping us from doing that. I think the current environment is changing some of that, but funding is one such thing. It's a big barrier there that does still need to be overcome, and we can talk a little bit about that later on as we go through this discussion.
Okay, yeah, no, I would like to get there. Before we move off the patients, though, I want to understand a little bit more how you view the patient's role in this. So this idea that, patients who have diseases, they're obviously eager to get these drugs. I'm seeing more and more an increased role for patient advocacy. And I feel like it's at a really nascent stage right now. And I feel like we see these like feel-good stories where a patient advocate played a huge role and got the drug to market, but it's really few and far these days. Do you see that picking up and helping, bringing the patient in from the beginning throughout the clinical trial process? What endpoints are we looking for? What are the quality of life measures that patients actually care about? Is that all part of this evolution?
I think it will be. It will be. Patients are going to have to play a pretty big role. Another area where Jeff, I think patients are going to have to play a big role is one of the barriers to creating the kind of environment that I'm describing is privacy and the concern for data security and that kind of stuff. And we live in a very polarized world right now. And one of the biggest concerns, one of the biggest threats to our healthcare system is misinformation and disinformation. So in this polarized world, I worry about misinformation and disinformation that will be used to stop these types of systems to be created. Much of what I'm talking about requires access to data. And I think the patients will have a very loud voice in terms of how their data is used in such a system. And if misinformation and disinformation scares patients away from this kind of a system being created. So for example, I can see some political types basically making it seem that Big Brother is watching and misusing this data. Yeah. That can make the creation of these types of safety surveillance systems so much harder. Now, I can tell you this, we at the FDA and in government in general, we take data and cybersecurity and privacy very, very seriously. And I am absolutely comfortable that nobody is willfully going to misuse any of this data. But I think again, once the politicians get involved, depending on which side that they're rooting for, I worry about them using misinformation, disinformation to kind of just turn a good thing like this into some political nonsense.
Sure. And that you're specifically referring to, I'm sure, the electronic health records becoming automatically sent to the FDA and all that information kind of integrated in this new technological world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there are many barriers. None of them are technological. Most of them are people hoarding data because data is an asset and they can make money out of it. The EHR manufacturers have their own reasons for creating islands because frankly they make a lot of money out of integrating systems, even across hospital systems. We're gonna need to cut through all of that to be able to get at this data. And I think it's going to require a lot of regulations to be passed to force that to happen, because I don't think many of the folks that are benefiting from this data hoarding are going to give it up easily.
Sure.
So I think that's where regulations come in. Lobbying groups will get involved, and that's where a lot of the misinformation, disinformation will come. So those are all the ways that these types of programs can be slowed down or stopped, and they'll occur. But this is where we need an informed public, folks like you, and kind of showing and making it easier for people to understand that, look, there's good outcomes that you will benefit from by supporting these types of initiatives.
Let me ask you about another source of data. So obviously you talked about the physician uploaded adverse events and the challenges there. Doctors just don't have time, usually involves additional paperwork. So that's why this may be pushed towards an electronic health record integration, as we're talking about, would provide tons more data, catch exponentially more adverse events that happen. What though about patients themselves with, all of those platforms that we have now? Is there a future where patients would just log on to the FDA website and report their own adverse events into the system that's reading them in real time?
Yeah, and I think they actually have the ability to do that today. But it's
But not caught up in real time, right? Like it's just kind of logged and then it's released, right?
Yeah.
It's just not processed. Yeah.
I think yeah. I think as we build this new modern safety surveillance system, obviously the EHRs will be a great source of input, but patients wanting to report that directly should be able to do that as well, and will be a signal that can be picked up. Some of that exists today, but another thing that we did, and this is a problem that still remains to be fixed. If you go to the FDA website with the intent to report something, I think when we looked at this a couple of years ago, there were several hundred entry points, and it was so confusing to find your way around the website just to report an adverse event, or even to lodge a complaint. So we had a program that we were working through to simplify the complaints management activity. But I don't know where that program is right now, but certainly it was an area of focus, at least in the last administration. And frankly, as the more we dug into it, the uglier that whole thing was, and it needed to be addressed. But you're right. It should, even though I can make the claim that those systems exist today, I also will recognize that it is extremely difficult for normal citizens to be able to do that easily, and that's something that does need to be fixed.
Yeah, I'm just kind of seeing this patient involvement as a parallel to the process you're describing of integrating FDA surveillance with the EHRs, because I think it was PwC, they put out this great report recently that really predicted that the future is going to be consumer and patient driven. And I could see that more and more, both on the drug development side and the clinical development side, with patient advocacy playing a huge role, but also on reporting adverse events. I just feel like the technology is literally in our hands at this point.
It is. But you got to be careful with stuff like that. People, for every good thing you do, people also find ways of abusing systems like that, right? Okay. So, and we saw that some of this happen during the pandemic, and the vaccine adverse event reporting. There was a lot of silly data being put out there. And some of the nation states were also added where they were reporting, they had bots reporting and flooding our systems with nonsense. So as we build these types of systems, we've got to make sure that the signals are accurate and real, as opposed to somebody manipulating them.
Yeah, good point. Okay. Well, I do want to leave some time for questions, but I did have a few more for you. I'm going to kind of combine my last two here. I
Okay.
want to understand on a practical, logistical level, this is kind of getting into your bread and butter, how this might actually work. What is the role for AI in all of this? And then the second part of that question, because I'm throwing them all at you at once, how does this affect how drug developers interact with the agency?
Sure. So AI is going to be a game changer. I think everybody, all of us recognize that. But I don't believe AI is going to replace people. I think that's one of the things I fundamentally disagree with this administration, and much of the initial Doge planning was, well, we're just going to use AI and we need 20-30% fewer people. I think that's nonsense. Um, I think AI and technology is going to be a productivity multiplier. So, we'll see AI co-pilots. Right now, a lot of AI has been introduced as co-pilots. And so, if you think about how co-pilots may work in the FDA, you may have a co-reviewer for submissions. You may have a co-inspector for training field inspectors. Um, and we already talked a little bit about the safety agents for adverse event detection. Um, that doesn't mean that they're going to replace people. It means these are tools that people can use to make themselves more productive. And as these tools mature, um, some decisions, not all decisions, some decisions, mundane ones in particular, that once used to be made by humans may be automated. So that'll speed up things and will help the agency scale. But a reviewer with a good co-pilot, a well-trained co-pilot, not the kind of stuff we're hearing right now where, it's just kind of like a Google search on steroids, but a trained a reviewer co-pilot can help a reviewer be 2 or 3 times more productive than what they are today. And I think those systems are being contemplated and will get developed. And I think those will help scale the agency a lot better. The traditional way most government agencies and FDA scale is by asking for more budget so that they can throw more people at a problem. That's the linear way of scaling. And frankly, it doesn't work. We have to have a way of scaling exponentially. And the only way to do that is through technology and good use of technology and data. But that's got some problems there. And we talked a little bit about funding. When you look at how agencies, in particular, how the FDA asks for funding, even though we've attempted to ask for IT funding, nobody really cares about IT. And IT comes across as a very boring a line item because people don't understand it. But it is the only way agencies can scale to the level that we're expected to scale. We will never be able to scale by throwing people and dollars like we've been doing in the past. And I think that's something that we're going to need to find a way of communicating better with, both at the user fee level, but also at the congressional level. Politicians can get behind a cancer drug or speeding up some particular treatment. Autism is getting a lot of attention right now. They can get behind things like that, but nobody's going to get that excited about, well, got to fund some IT activities or some AI agents. That just doesn't sound very exciting to anyone. So we're going to have to find a way of making these pitches. But I would say for every dollar you spend on technology solutions, especially to scale functions like reviewers or inspectors, I think you get a lot better return on investment from your IT investments than you do from just throwing more bodies at it. And frankly, throwing bodies doesn't work either because, for years we've shown, even when Congress gives us money, we've not been able to hire people to fill those roles. And given the current climate and all the how civil servants are portrayed, it's going to be even harder to recruit people. So I think that technology, there's got to be a way where both user fee programs and congressional appropriations directly fund strategic IT activities like the safety surveillance systems, like the co-inspectors or the co-reviewers that I talked about.
Yeah.
And those have got to be multi-year funds, not just, Congress has this thing about they'll just fund year-to-year funds. We've got to get to a point where we can fund multi-year projects. And Congress just doesn't do that. But these are some of the shifts that still need to happen.
It's interesting that it's hard to get Congress people on board with investing in IT. Go to the private sector. That's where all the money's going right now, right?
Yeah, and the same politicians will keep talking about, well, we need to operate more like a private industry. Well, look at the funding and how those folks fund it. So yeah, it's frustrating, and you just described some of the many frustrations I beat my head against over the last 6 years.
Okay. I'm going to bring it back to that last point, just to wrap this up before we move to questions, which is, as we move towards potentially deregulated, quicker to market, higher safety surveillance, and this integration with EHRs and AI kind of helping to make this possible at this scale, what do companies need to be thinking about right now? What do sponsors need to be preparing?
I'm going to focus this towards that last point I was making around the funding. There are already big shifts that are going on right now. We talked a little bit about genomics and the complex data structures that we're dealing with right now. The days of static submissions and multi-year reviews are not sustainable. We're going to have to move into collaborative reviews. When you look at genomics data in particular, when that's submitted, this is, very complex algorithms are at play here. There's very complex data here. And this is not something that a reviewer can just read about and try and figure out and understand the data. They're going to have a conversation or a collaboration with the submitters. The FDA typically doesn't like that, and that we're not structured to work that way. So we're going to have to shift the whole way we do reviews into a more collaborative environment for reviewing. And there's going to be a lot more conversations, a lot more back and forth. If you use some AI technology in analyzing your data, it's quite possible the FDA won't have the technology or even the systems or the horsepower to run some of those models. How are we going to facilitate those? These are some of the things that need to be thought through. And I think industry has got to push for this kind of a system and an environment to be built. I was part of the PDUFA 7 negotiating team. And I tell you, having come from industry, I was really frustrated by those discussions, because the default way FDA goes into these discussions is we're just going to keep doing what we've always done, status quo. That's their strategy going into this. Industry will try to chip away and move the needle a little bit, but the FDA rarely budges from its comfortable way of doing static reviews. I was surprised during PDUFA 7 that about the most that industry asked for is some proof of concept models for doing collaborative reviews. That was 7 years ago. I think we're going through a discussion and review right now. I don't know if those proof of concepts are going to move into production or not. I personally think there should have been something production been put on the table 7 years ago. But again, industry needs to get a little bit more aggressive. Industry provides about 50% of the funds that the FDA gets. And I think they've not been as ambitious in asking for the types of outcomes they should be asking for. So I think industry's got to get a little bit more aggressive about that. I think Congress needs to get a little bit more strategic and long-term about the kinds of changes and outcomes that they want to see. But my advice to industry would be this. When you look at the FDA has no agency-wide strategic plan. There is no strategy at the FDA. The centers may individually have some priorities, but even the centers, there is no such thing as strategy within the FDA. I think this is something that the industry is going to have to take a lead on. Industry should develop a strategy for what they expect out of their regulatory agency. They certainly fund 50% of that, and they can influence the other 50% through the lobbying of functions and power that they have. But they can play a big role in that. But to do that, they've got to develop a strategy. The FDA won't do that or has no mechanism of doing that. Industry needs to take a lead in doing that, and then use the user fee funds as well as the political lobbying power to force the agency to execute towards that.
Interesting approach. Okay. Well, let's turn to some of the questions that have come in. First one here is on that privacy issue that you mentioned would be of concern to a lot of people. This person would like to know if the information can be gathered anonymously, or if you think that maybe just would be identified by physician. You seem pretty confident that it would be protected, but in what way?
Yeah, at the FDA, we don't need, for most cases, I think we're looking for signals, so we don't need the patient information. I think it would be okay to have that information de-identified, so at least patients would be comfortable that the regulatory agency doesn't have your data. But we would need a pointer back to the physician or somebody that can take some action on that, because there may be a signal that requires a little bit more information that only the patient or the physician supporting that patient may have. So we do need some way of getting back. But if there was concern about the regulatory agency having it, we don't need to have it directly, but we do need to have a way of following up on some of that activity.
Okay. Next question here is more about the use of AI. So again, we touched on that just briefly near the end of our conversation. You do see it as a game changer, but this person would like to know a little bit more about how it's already being implemented. How could it be implemented better? How is it actually going to speed drug approvals and aid in that post-market surveillance? And what are some of the obstacles that still need to be overcome there?
Sure. So I think we've heard about ELSA and things like that, right? So these are generic search capabilities that have been deployed internally, and they'll have some limited benefit, but already there's a lot that's been written about these tools, that they're very limited, and certainly they've not been trained specifically on the data that the FDA already has. Just to give you an idea, at the FDA, we had something like almost 20 petabytes of data, and to put that into context, take the Library of Congress, which is like 530 linear miles of bookshelves. You digitize all of that, it would comfortably fit within our system. So we have a lot of data. I think the kinds of systems I was talking about, where a co-pilot for reviewers, a co-pilot for inspections, we need to take all the inspection data that we have, train a co-pilot specifically on the protocols by which we do inspections, but also all the past history we have in terms of, we did this, we found this are the actions we took, this is the outcomes we had. So there's a lot of machine learning or training that we can do for these co-pilots to make them specialists. That hasn't happened yet. I think people are starting to think about doing that. The barrier to that is funding that I talked about. Now, I don't think we need more funds from Congress or from the user fees, but we do need those funds to be directed towards IT areas. Most of what the centers and the FDA does is scale the only way they know how to scale, which is throwing people and bodies at these things. Divert that into creating the smart systems which scale far better than people do.
Do you think that the FDA is staffed with the people who could work and make these co-pilots happen if the money were diverted, or is there a workforce issue here too, to get the most highly skilled AI folks out there?
No, I don't think so. I think the FDA, a lot of what the FDA does, especially for specialty activities, we'll never be able to recruit the specialists in AI, and frankly, we don't need to. I've always maintained, and I've worked in many healthcare companies, private as well as on the government side. There is no way a healthcare organization or even government is going to be able to hire the kind of specialists that are AI specialists that Google or Microsoft are going to be able to hire and retain them. We don't need those people. When we do need them, we just need them for a small amount of time. If we have the dollars, we can bring those folks in as consultants, and that's a better model. So if the funds are there, I don't think getting experts is going to be an issue for government. Never has been. The one thing that government is blessed by is everybody wants to do business with the government, and we have access to very sharp people from the outside when we need them. The types of people we need internally are those that can manage these projects, the project managers, the architects, the designers. And I think we showed over the last 5 years that we had the capability of hiring some very, very good people from industry. Unfortunately, many of them got laid off. But the cures legislation and the Title 21 hiring authority that the FDA has allowed us to hire very capable people.
Awesome. I got one more question here I'm going to throw at you, but if anyone out there listening has one, now is the time. We're going to wrap up in just a few minutes. But the last question here I wanted to put to you is about the FDA's breakthrough therapy designation. And I'm actually going to expand that to all sorts of designations the FDA offers to accelerate approvals. How do you see that fitting in with this move towards deregulation, and how would that impact the regulatory timelines, the risk in this kind of new model that you envision?
Jeff, I don't know much about that area. What I am concerned about is, at least with the technology folks that I still talk to, some folks internally, there's a huge disconnect. I mean, these statements are coming out, and there's a disconnect between operationally how they're going to be dealing with many of these changes that they're talking about, and that's the disconnect. I said a little bit earlier, much of the things that this administration talks about from an intent perspective make good sense, but their execution is poor because they don't think about it strategically in terms of, to make this happen, these are the process changes we're going to need to make, these are the technology changes we're going to need to make, and somebody's going to have to manage and oversee that change happening. That level of coordination, planning, strategy, execution is just not there. So I think what I see happening is some grand statements being made, and then all kinds of fumbling happening internally to deal with it. And much of that, frankly, right now is probably just going to happen manually. I don't think there's going to, anybody's developing systems or support structures to coordinate much of this. So internally, it just seems very chaotic.
Yeah. So like you said at the very beginning, ride this out and then start to rebuild with a little bit more strategy and a little more intention.
Yeah, and I hope there's a risk in this. If the next administration comes in, whoever the next administration is, if they basically let's say it's a Democratic administration and they say, well, we're just going to turn everything back and go back to business as usual, I think that would be horrible. I think that's if we go back to being the same way we were before, then it would not be a good thing either. I think what this administration has shown is, look, there's a lot of power that agencies have internally to get things done if they choose to get them done. And I hope future administrations make use of that to do something constructive, but do it more thoughtfully in a more planned and strategic way. So that's, like I said, the one thing that I'm not a fan of the chaos that's going on right now. I'm not a fan of some of the execution. But look, if there's one thing that this administration leaves behind, is if they bust the resistance to change that has existed in the agency and across government, that's a good thing. And I think that would be a legacy that they can be proud of.
Well, I think that's the perfect way to end this. That's a great wrap up. Thank you so much for your time, all of your insights, a lot to think about and unpack here. Thank you for everyone who joined us. And don't forget to tune in on November 5th for the second part of the series, where I'll talk even more about FDA and its future. So thank you, Vid.
Thank you.